Hello and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Hannah. It is the very last day of March, so it is time for another wrap up. These past few weeks, I've read everything from novels to novellas to manga, so I actually have quite a lot to go through here today. This week has also been pretty interesting so far. The start of it was my birthday, and we're in like a lockdown lights, so we can't do too much. But bookshops are one of the things that are considered essential and still open, so we just went to a few of those and walked through a park and just kind of walked through the city for my birthday. And it was like one of the first really nice days of the year. It was 72 degrees, which in my opinion is the perfect temperature, and it was sunny and everything. So it was so nice to just be outside and just in like nature and go check out books and stuff. It was a really good day. And like today we went and walked into the woods for a bit because tonight the French president Macron is going to be making another announcement. We're probably going to be heading in toward a stricter lockdown, so we were kind of just enjoying the outside while it lasts. And with the nice weather, I'm kind of giving my hair a break from being straightened, so it looks kind of weird right now, but I'm just gonna let it do what it wants to do. So let's get into this. So the first novella I read is actually for the local book club I'm a part of. It was actually my suggestion for the month, and I was really surprised that it got as many votes as it did. And that is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. I wasn't sure how this was gonna be, and it is very bright. This novella and its sequel were both on sale on Kindle for like less than €3. So I, for the first time ever, got an ebook because I just really didn't think that the physical copy would come in time, and it was also like €18 or something ridiculous like that. So I went with the cheaper option. But this story follows a monk named Chi. They actually go by they, them pronouns, but this monk, they travel across like the world, and they pretty much just gather people's stories and histories, pretty much anyone and everyone. They don't discriminate on who is telling the story to them. And they have this animal companion with them who pretty much remembers everything they're told, so the monk themselves doesn't exactly have to remember everything. The bird can kind of repeat it back. And this story begins with Chi following the procession of an empress that has just passed away, a really famous empress. And when they kind of get to the end of the procession, they meet this older lady who is actually named Rabbit and is represented by like the rabbits on the cover. Granted, it's kind of hard to see the cover on here. They spend some days with Rabbit, and Rabbit retells the story of the Empress because they were friends with her, they were a servant of hers, and they became really close. And the entirety of the story is pretty much just the retelling of tidbits of her and the Empress's life and how the Empress came to power and things of that nature. I really enjoyed like the folktale feel and how the book was separated into basically a bunch of like smaller stories. It was like little snapshots and snippets of the Empress's life and what she did. However, since right away in the beginning of the book, we're kind of just thrown into this world, and it's not just an ordinary world, it's a world with magic and mages. And it seems like a very vibrant and diverse world, which I liked. But on the other hand, since I didn't understand how anything in that world worked, it was confusing at times. However, as I went through the novella, I did feel like it got easier to understand as I became more familiar with the universe that it's based in. But the writing itself is beautiful, and just the world in general, I'd like to know more about it. So I was happy to learn that there is a sequel, and I'm not sure if there's going to be any more past the two. I don't know if it's only going to be a duology, but I hope that the author keeps up with this series because it's nice just seeing snippets of the world. In the end, I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars just because it was too confusing in the beginning for me to get into it right away. It took a little bit. So right after that, I read the sequel, When the Tiger Comes Down the Mountain. Oh, that one looks a little bit better than the other one. Both of these came out in 2020, which I think is kind of impressive. In this novella, we once again follow Chi, but this time they are traveling more north, I believe it is, and they are being escorted by a mammoth and a mammoth rider. And pretty quickly, they are attacked by these shapeshifters. They're pretty much tigers that can shift into a human-looking form. Chi and their escort take shelter in a barn with the tigers kind of outside circling them. And Chi uses their storytelling to try and buy them some time, especially since it's a story that the tigers know. However, as Chi tells the story, the tigers try to correct discrepancies and things that they don't believe actually happened and insert what they say is true into the story. This one was a lot more straightforward than the first one. However, I liked the way the first one was written more. This one does have more of that folktale feel, especially since there's more magic involved with the tigers shape-shifting and things like that. In the end, I rated this one a 3 out of 5 because I had to take a star off because it deals with one of the tropes that I cannot stand, and that is insta-love. When characters instantly fall in love with someone, that just puts me off. There's no reason for it, and it's usually not explained well. And in this case, it seemed very one-sided and manipulative, and I just really didn't enjoy that part of it. But once again, I really enjoy the universe this takes place in, and if the author writes any more books about Chi and their adventures, I will definitely be reading them. Next, I picked up a manga that I was first interested in because I saw the preview for the anime that I think comes out April 6th, if I'm not mistaken, and that is The Way of the Househusband. I saw this at my library and was just surprised they had it, so I grabbed it since I knew the anime would be coming out soon. And this is a comedy manga that was published in 2018. It essentially follows this former Yakuza member known as the Immortal Dragon, and he has settled down, he has a wife, she works, he does all the cooking and cleaning, and it pretty much goes through his life as being a house husband. It's very slice of life, and in this volume, it seemed like there might be a little bit of an overarching plot going on. The chapters are incredibly short, and this is very fast-paced even for a manga. If you've seen the anime Horimiya, it really reminds me of that style where scenes are really short and you kind of can't tell how much time has passed in the story. The art in this is really good and detailed. Like right away in the beginning, like it shows him with his like Yakuza tattoos and stuff, and it's just like crazy detailed, and it's just a really like beautiful manga, really. And it is pretty funny. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars in the end. It was just a really nice break reading between the bigger novels, and if you're just looking for something lighthearted and humorous, then this is it. Even though I didn't read it right after, I think I'll talk about the second volume next. And I also just realized I never said the author. It's Kosuke Uno or Ono, I'm not quite sure on the last name. This volume I actually thought was funnier than the first one. However, there were some situations where Tatsu's reaction seemed due to PTSD, and that made me uncomfortable because I'm not okay with laughing at that. So I don't know if it was done on purpose to kind of show how this could be a little bit darker. I don't know. But I had to take a star off for that in the end, even though I liked some of the stories in here more, just because of that aspect. And there are bonus chapters in both of these volumes, and there's one that is just about their cats, and it is probably the best thing in this book, to be honest. Like, I just loved it. Like, this cat is amazing. But yeah, I'll probably pick up whatever other volumes my library has. Like I said, I like reading the manga just as like break in between more of the like darker or thicker novels. This one I also did give a 4 out of 5. Next, I read Sadie by Courtney Summers. I know this author recently came out with a book, and for some reason the name of it just completely went out of my head. But Since it's a newer book, I know it's probably not something I'm gonna get my hands on for a while. So I got this book to see how I like the author's writing style, but this one was published in 2018. It is a YA thriller / mystery kind of book, and this story is about two sisters, Sadie and Maddie. When Maddie is 13, she is found dead in a field, and her 19-year-old sister, Sadie, sets out to find who she assumes is the killer. Their mom had abandoned them a few years ago, so they didn't have a great upbringing. So a majority of this book follows Sadie and basically her quest for revenge. Now, this is a multimedia book. Half of it is in like a podcast format and half of it is from Sadie's point of view. I actually think in the end I might enjoy the podcast parts more. And because of the podcast parts, I think listening this on audiobook is probably the best way to experience it. I just read it in the physical form and I thought it was just fine, but I just feel like maybe I would have been more immersed the other way. But one thing I really liked about this book is it shows that the YA genre can deal with some really, really dark topics. And because of the podcast format, it really kind of reminded me of those Netflix like crime documentaries. Unfortunately, I could never really connect with Sadie. She felt really one note because she was kind of running at 100 the whole time and just never stopping. And I understand why that was the case, and I could sympathize with her cause, but I just couldn't connect with her, and some of the situations were just really, really convenient. Everything this book explores, revenge, sibling love, grief, regret, it's all very bittersweet, and it does make for a very intriguing and gripping story. But unfortunately, the climax happens completely off screen. We never find out exactly what happens. You can infer some things, but just since you're following this character throughout like her entire mission, you kind of expect a definitive ending, and you just don't get that. And so for me, it just felt like such this buildup of like tension and just excitement and everything, and you're coming to the conclusion and then it's okay, moving on. So it just felt like it just completely dropped me at the end there, and that was a bit too much. So in the end, I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 because I'm just convinced I don't like the endings of books. Alright, the next book I read, I just recently did a reading vlog on, so we'll have that right up here. And that is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. I still don't know which way I'm supposed to say that. This was published in 1971 and is a horror classic. So I don't think I really need to say a description for this book. It's The Exorcist. Like, I think everyone would know about this for the most part. In a nutshell, it's about a kid that becomes possessed and follows the people that are around her. So right away, I would say that the book more focuses on the people around Regan, the little girl that gets possessed, than on Regan herself, which I personally really loved. It made the book more interesting to me, and I liked that the plot just wasn't save Regan. There even seemed to be some sort of side plot going on with the church at some points, but unfortunately in the last third of the book, that's just kind of completely pushed aside and isn't really mentioned anymore. Can you not do this, Appa? If you hear chewing in the background, it's just Appa eating his house, apparently. If you were picking this book up to be afraid, I wouldn't recommend it. It had one really creepy scene to me that kind of got to me, but I think that was kind of because I had the images from the movie in my head, and I think that is what made it creepier than it normally would have been for me. Everything else is a lot more on just the straight up disturbing side, so it's not really scary in the end. I also thought that the escalation of events would just keep being heightened until the very end of the book, but once again, that's not the case. The climax of the book is more like 3/4 into it than at the very end, and right when you think things are gonna be completely off the rails and go crazy, it just kind of stops. Another thing I really appreciate this book is that the entire time they're taking an extremely scientific approach toward possession and everything surrounding it. It was a psychiatrist, I think it is, that first even mentions the word possession. It's not the mom that says it at all or anyone else. So they check all like the physical and mental options before even thinking anything about possession. And even then they're like, it's probably just like a power of suggestion type thing. And I just thought that take on possession was very intriguing. And because I've seen so many movies where it's just like the stereotypical possession thing, and it's more like on the priest going there and stuff, and that's such a backseat of this book. So I think that's why I ended up enjoying this so much. One thing though is, if you remember in the movie, there are 2 priests, and for a majority of this book there's only one, so I was actually even wondering if there was 2 priests in the book. But the second one does show up pretty much at the end of the book, but we never really learn much about him, and it just seemed so sudden and was just such a shift. It just kind of felt weird in a way and abrupt, and so I just kind of wish we had learned more about this second priest that comes in. But in the end, I gave this a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. I really just wish there was more creepy scenes or scary scenes instead of just disturbing, but I guess that kind of just depends on what scares you. But I'm very happy that I finally read this horror classic. This next book isn't one that I would normally pick up myself, but I had a friend go to the library with me, and she said she had read this in her early 20s and she wasn't sure if it was as good as she remembered it to be, so I thought it would kind of be interesting to read it and see if it still kind of stood the test of time, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't. And that is Angelfall by Susan E. I guess that's how you say the last name. It's literally just 2 E's. So, this book. Wow. I don't think this book has any idea what it wants to be, but I'll say the other stuff about it first. So, this is a YA fantasy that was published in 2011, and I don't really think should exist. It's very weird. So this book basically follows this girl named Penryn, and she's living in this post-apocalyptic world where angels have suddenly attacked humankind, and 6 weeks have passed since the first attack, and she's trying to get her and her family to a safer location. It's her sister, who is in a wheelchair and is unable to walk, and I believe the sister is only about 7 years old, and then her mother, who has schizophrenia and is currently unmedicated. So the story essentially starts with her trying to get them to a safer location. They run into this group of angels that are attacking another angel, and one of the angels gets their wings cut off, and as the angels retreat, they steal the little sister, and Penryn rescues the fallen angel to try to get him to take her to where the angel lair is. And the story kind of goes from there, like, as they travel together, and they kind of hit up a lot of the stereotypes you see in those kind of stories. And then there's some things that just kind of come out of nowhere that make no sense at all. And then there's some scenes that are extremely dark and are way into the horror side. And I thought those were interesting, but they just didn't seem to fit at all. And this just seems like such an amalgamation of so many different genres, but in a pretty bad way. Because it just doesn't make sense. But in a way that made me more intrigued, because I'm just like, what nonsense is this book gonna do next? Like, it was so weird. So I read this pretty quickly, but like at the end I'm just like, what did I just read? Like, it was I don't know what it was. So this is book 1 of 3. And I know that in a series they're kind of supposed to build into each other. But this book gives absolutely zero answers. Nothing is answered. Even throughout the story, as Penryn is asking questions to this angel, he just doesn't answer anything. So like, the character doesn't know what the fuck's going on, we don't know what the fuck's going on, and it's just, everything's up in the air, no one knows what's happening. So in the end, I gave this a 2 out of 5, just because it was a bit entertaining in the ridiculousness of it, but I will not read the sequels. And finally, we have the redemption book, The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. So I went into this pretty much not knowing anything about it. What I thought I knew about this book was completely wrong. I was actually confusing it with a different book. But this ended up being really good in the end. But this was published in 2020. It's like fantasy/horror. One of the things that sucks, and you can probably see this coming, is it didn't stick the landing at the end. I'm not really a fan of the ending, and that is what leads me to rate this as a 4.5 instead of a 5 out of 5. So that's unfortunate and it really sucked, but at this point, you can kind of see it coming. So this book ended up being very different in that I thought our main character, Emmanuel, was going to team up with the witches in this book. That's not really the case though, and the main story ends up being the town versus Emmanuel versus the witches. And the way the world building is done in this is it's a very patriarchal society. It's a sin for women to know how to read. It's a sin to even swim in the river. Like, pretty much thinking for yourself in any way is a sin. And the men, they have multiple wives, especially their leader, who's called the Prophet. He has like 1 million wives and who knows how many children, but he can pretty much just take whoever he wants. So there's so much like hypocrisy and betrayal that you really, really hate the people in the town. So when we get to where it's town versus Emmanuel versus the witches, I'm pretty much on the witches' side, and I think that's why I had such a problem with the ending. And like, I understand why what happens, but still, also, one thing with the witches is the description of them is pretty creepy. Like, the image I had of them in my head, like, I really liked, and I wish I was good enough at drawing to actually, like, draw it, because I'm very intrigued by it. And Emmanuel's interactions with them are pretty much my favorite part of the book. So in terms of a witch story, I think this is fairly unique, and there's supposed to be a sequel, even though this wraps up pretty well. But if that does come out, I will definitely read it, because this world is just really interesting, and there was a lot of hints that the rest of the world probably isn't like this. So I'm kind of interested to see what the author would do with a sequel. Finally, and that's everything I read in the second half of March. It seems like so much more than it was, but thank you for hanging out with me. As always, I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as that helps me out a lot. And until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.